political persuasions.
Of course. Of course. Always makes for an interesting debate.
Hello, Dr. Jackson. I love your background.
Hello, Dr. Thomas.
I think all the panelists are here now. So I guess we can go ahead and start the session. So exciting. Welcome to the UMD chapter of UAEM's first formal event, A Racist Healthcare System, What Are You Gonna Do About It? I'm Tayaba. I'm a rising senior here at UMD, and I'm also the president of this chapter.
Thank you for all your work.
Yeah, definitely. Does everyone else want to introduce themselves that are on the board?
Hi, everyone.
Sure. Oh, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Manal Zahid. I'm a rising senior, a public health major, and I'm the secretary on board of UAEM.
My name is Nuha. I am a rising senior. I'm a neurobiology and physiology major, and I'm the vice president for the chapter.
My name is Alvina. I'm also a rising senior. I'm majoring in biology, and I'm the treasurer.
My name is Kayla Foster. I'm also a rising senior. I'm a public health science major, and I'm the marketing and outreach director.
Okay, cool. So before we go ahead and get started, I just wanted to set some basic rules for decorum. So first off, I just want to ask all the participants, excluding the panelists, to go ahead and turn their video off and mute themselves. There will be opportunities throughout the session to ask questions, at which time you can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand, and you can, we'll call on you, and then at that point you can unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask your question. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question, you can go ahead and drop it in the chat box, and one of us can ask your question on your behalf, which is totally fine. I just want to make everyone aware that, any disrespectful behavior will not be tolerated and you will be promptly kicked out, but I don't think that should be a concern. And also note that this session is being recorded, so just keep that in mind. We're going to link our program in the chat box, so if everyone just wants to go ahead and follow along with that, feel free to. Let me just give you a quick rundown on who we are. So we are Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. We are an international student-based organization that advocates for accessibility and affordability of medicines by advocating for social change in the biomedical R&D system at the university level. We want to empower students to go to their universities and make sure that research that is being done on campus is being done in a way where the end product is accessible and affordable to everyone regardless of their income. Our vision is to see publicly funded institutions also promote the affordability of medicines, not just for individuals here, but across the world. And so a big thing with this is that while at first glance, the topic of this webinar may seem a little off base, but it's important to recognize the intersectionality of the access to medicines movement and the role that race plays within this issue. So that's why we're hosting today's webinar. If you would like to learn more about our campaigns and what we do, how to get further involved, I would just ask you to stay back after the session is over, and we would love to answer any of the questions you guys have. So at this point, I'm gonna pass it along to Alvina, who will help introduce our panelists.
I was muted. Thank you, Tayaba. Hi, everyone. It is my pleasure to be introducing our first two panelists. So first, we have Dr. Sakobi Wilson. Dr. Wilson is an associate professor for the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health, along with the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics here at the University of Maryland. He is also the founder and director of the Community Engagement Environmental Justice and Health Lab, or CEEJH. Dr. Wilson is an environmental health scientist with over 10 years of experience working in community-university partnerships on environmental health and justice issues. He has expertise in exposure science and applied environmental health, including community-based exposure assessment, environmental justice science, social epidemiology, environmental health disparities, and community-based participatory research. So for our second panelist, we have Dr. Delvin Jackson. Dr. Jackson is a professor of behavioral and community health and is trained as a health communication scientist whose research examines how digital health tools can improve the health of vulnerable populations. Specifically, she assesses this work at the consumer and provider level by exploring how consumers access and use these tools within and outside of the clinical setting, and how providers use these tools to improve care. Her research also identifies communication inequalities that exist and inhibit consumers and providers from accessing and using these tools. Additionally, Dr. Jackson understands that one's mental health can greatly impact physical wellness. Therefore, her research also includes assessing how digital health can support mental health wellness comprehensively. And then I'm going to pass it off to Manahil to talk about our next panelist.
Hi everyone, so I will be introducing Dr. Rebecca Fenton. She is an adolescent medicine fellow at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. She's received her bachelor's in human biology at Stanford University and attended medical school at the University of Pennsylvania. She's completed her residency in pediatrics at Seattle Children's Hospital, and her clinical interests include healthcare for marginalized youth populations, specifically with a focus on the experiences of Black youth. And she also participates in advocacy in and out of the healthcare setting about cultural humility and health equity. Also, another amazing panelist we have today is Dr. Stephen Thomas. Dr. Thomas is a professor of health policy and management and director of the Center of Health Equity. He is a principal investigator on the Center of Excellence in Race, Ethnicity, and Health Disparities funded by NIMHD. His award-winning work has also become recognized as one of the scholarly contributions leading to the 1997 presidential apology to survivors of the syphilis study done at Tuskegee. And he now focuses on translation of science on chronic diseases into community-based interventions designed to eliminate racial and ethnic healthcare disparities, and how the syphilis study at Tuskegee has impacted the trust and willingness of African Americans to participate in health-related research. So now I'll hand it off to Nuha.
So our next panelist is Dr. Vialta. So Dr. Jennifer Vialta is a pediatric dental specialist in a private practice and a faculty member at UOP School of Dentistry. She obtained her MPH from the UCLA School of Public Health. During her training, she developed a community program and trained lay mothers as community oral health workers, also known as promotoras. The aim of this study was to help improve oral health in the children who are disproportionately affected with childhood caries, those who come from low socioeconomic and minority backgrounds. Their findings were published in the Frontiers of Public Health Journal. And our final panelist is Dr. Bradley. Dr. Lisa Bradley is the director and assistant professor of the Master of Science in Health Informatics at the University of Findlay. She has served on multiple healthcare, educational, leadership, and community-related committees, boards, and teams encompassing state, regional, and national levels. Her collaboration with UF and Nutrient of Lima helped to secure a grant for local students registered within the Closing the Achievement Gap program, which allows underserved student populations to explore higher education programs. She is also developing her own business, Omni Enterprises LLC, as a platform to empower and enhance individuals through the vehicle of education. So with that, I will now pass it on to Kayla.
Thank you. Now that we have been introduced briefly to our panelists, we're going to transition to the next part of the webinar. And so this is just going to be a quick section where we ask the panelists to share their lived experiences with racism in their profession and how it has impacted their professional work, how combating racism has become part of their work. And so at this time, we also ask that questions be kept to a minimum and saved till our dedicated Q&A session later on in the program. If you have a pressing question, you can put it in the chat box, and then if we have time, we'll answer it now, but chances are we'll answer it towards the end in our dedicated Q&A session. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass off to Alvina.
All right, so we'll be starting with you, Dr. Wilson. Could you share your experiences with racism in the work field and how that has impacted what you do?
Yeah, well, thank you. And how much time do I have with my response? Because y'all know I'm a talker. Some of you may not know that, but I am a talker. So give me a timing. 2 minutes? Response? 3 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Oh, 5. Okay, let's go. So, I'm a country boy from Mississippi. So as I've been telling folks, all of a sudden everybody's recognizing their racism. I've been Black my whole life, y'all. I'm from Mississippi, right? So I remember the first racist incident as a 5-year-old. I remember playing soccer and people would call me the N-word. Playing baseball, people would call me the N-word. In school, I actually have alopecia. So think about being a little kid in Mississippi dealing with racism and being bald. I've been bald since I was 7 years old. So that was a lot of stress and strife that I dealt with in my childhood. Now you fast forward to my years as an adult, as a researcher, part of the reason why I do the work that I do, because I live in a community in Mississippi that's near a highway, major highway, that's near a sewage treatment plant, that's near landfill. My dad's a pipe fitter, working at coal-fired power plants. My dad himself has dealt with nuisance on the job, right? Being underpaid. The first one, the last one hired, the first one laid off, right? So that's been my family experience with racism. And part of the reason why I do this work is because of my lived experiences in Mississippi, but also I was inspired by, I met Dr. Robert Bullard, who's been called the father of the environmental justice movement, and Dr. Benjamin Chavis, who coined the term environmental racism at a conference at a historically Black college in Elizabeth City State in 1995. So since then, I was like, that's what I want to do, right? I want to work on social justice issues. I want to try to address environmental racism in my work. Now, in my career, from student to now, I dealt with racism in academia. As a student at UNC Chapel Hill, I dealt with racism. As a postdoc at University of Michigan, I was told by someone, you're really, talking about CBPR a lot and talking about your work a lot, but you were the last one we selected into our postdoc program. I was told this as a way to cut me off at the knees, right? When I did my first position at the University of South Carolina, I was given the verbal agreement that's going to be in a tenure track position, okay? They gave the written agreement to one of my colleagues who was a white woman in my postdoc program. I was waiting for 2 weeks and they had to make up a position for me. It was a research track position. So my career was, put off the rails because of that type of incident. Similarly, another incident in South Carolina, I had funding for a Black student, PhD student. The white chair of one of the departments of schools of public health said, well, you cannot mentor her. So I had to be a co-mentor with this white department chair, which made no sense because I was funding the student. There's other instances that occurred in South Carolina. And since I've been at Maryland, the issues have been part of the culture of the university, right? The culture of our School of Public Health. I do community-based participatory research. And so from day one when I got to campus, I wanted to make sure that the team promotion process was fair. And I would push and say, how are you going to say we're a School of Public Health? We focus on social justice. We value public health practice. We value solutions. We value action. But in the team promotion process, we didn't have the metrics. We did not have the metrics in the team promotion process. Additionally, other experiences have been more around, so the imposter syndrome. You're a faculty of color, you're teaching in the class, you're getting feedback from students who are saying that your class is too difficult, Dr. Wilson. So there were white female students who went to complain to my director, and my director told me, Shakobi, you have to tone it down. So for several years, I was walking on eggshells because I didn't want to get bad evaluations from students in the class, right? And so that really undermined the integrity of my teaching. That undermined the integrity of the work I was trying to do. And it showed me that really I wasn't valued, and my work in environmental justice was also not valued. But I think those experiences, what they've done for me, it made me recognize that the racism I see in where environmental hazards go in communities of color, many communities of color use as sacrifice zones, where you see the dumping of landfills, you see the dumping of waste products, you see the petrochemical operations. So I felt that same kind of being dumped on, being marginalized, being devalued, being dehumanized in academia. And so I think it was important to note, like in this work, your lived experiences drive the work that you do. So my experiences with racism as a child, my experiences with racism in grad school, my experience with racism in my postdoc, my experience with racism and being otherized and being marginalized and being devalued, being undermined at Maryland, it informs the work that I do. But what's important is we all can keep fighting and overcome that. And it's important for you as students to understand we have to work together to change the culture of academia, to change the culture of medicine. We have to make sure that our lived experiences are valued. And don't let anyone tell you that the fact that you're Black, you're Latino, you're Asian, that's not important. Because that's the reason why I do the work that I do, y'all. That's the reason why I'm here. I'm trying to do research that solves problems. I'm trying to do STEM for social justice. I'm trying to do science that's about action, that's about change, that's about the people. I'm not trying to get change in my pocket. I'm trying to get change for my communities. So what is science about if you're not trying to change things, right? It's not just good enough to do discovery science. It's not just good enough to do helicopter science, pain pippin science, guinea pig science, right? Extractive science. As a person of color, I have to do science that's for my people. That's about changing the situations, and it's about empowering folks. And so that's why when you think about eradicating racism, it's just not good enough to study it. We have to attack it. We have to combat it. We have to make sure we get rid of it. And it's important for this discussion that we understand that's the core of why we're here. That's my why. As a Black man, my why is to make sure we get rid of racism. And so I'm going to do that as an academic, as a mentor, as a teacher, as a scholar. I'm also going to do that as an environmental justice activist and environmental justice advocate. I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. No, awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm just kind of keeping track of time for everyone as well. So I'm going to IM you guys so you can just keep that chat box up. So if you're speaking, I'll just IM you when your time is getting close. But thank you so much. I love the passion, so I'm pumped. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences, Dr. Wilson. That was a great way to get this whole thing started. Now we would like to hear from Dr. Jackson.
Thank you. So first off, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting myself and all the other panelists to be a part of this. I'm so excited to see all of your faces and your passion and your interest in such a very, very important topic area. And then one more thing, I just want, out of respect for one of my mentors who's here on the call, Dr. Thomas, AKA Dr. T, I just want to make a minor revision in my title. I am an assistant research professor, not professor. The reason why I say out of respect for him, he has worked very hard to get that title professor. I'm not there yet, but that is a part of my goal. So just want to make that minor revision. But as it relates to the question and how racism has affected my work and my life, the thing that, although my research agenda isn't specifically anti-racism, but racism is intertwined in all of my work. And what I mean by that is the lens in which I operate every day, personally and professionally, is first as a Black individual, then as a Black woman, and then in the lens of anti-racism. So in every space that I am in, friends, family, colleagues, acquaintances know that if I sense any form of injustice, something that we need to be aware of, be mindful of, I'm always speaking up in regards to it. I'm asking the uncomfortable questions that maybe others are thinking, but don't feel very comfortable saying or stating. So that is one way that it has impacted me, because similar to Dr. Wilson, my very first experience with racism was on the playground at the age of 4 at a predominantly white school at the time, where a young lady told me that I could not come over her house and play because I was the N-word and I was a grease monkey. So I have had these experiences from the beginning, and moving all the way up in professional spaces where maybe it wasn't that that overt racism, but tons of covert racism, right? What has been deemed as socially acceptable racism. So those things where people have made comments or even created systems and programs or policies that had made it difficult for many of us to advance and benefit these spaces. So when I think about how all of those experiences in my professional and personal life have impacted my work, I am always asking questions on multiple levels. So in my students, when I'm teaching in class, I push my students to ask the questions on how does race impact the project or the research question that they are exploring. Because being in the School of Public Health, the thing that I always encourage my students to remember, especially being a student, whether you're taking a class in public health or majoring in public health, that racism is a determinant of health. It's a social determinant of health. If we don't acknowledge how racism plays a role in healthcare, health equity, then we're missing the mark. If we address every other factor and don't address racism, we are missing the mark. So I see that I have 1 minute left. And then the other part, how it relates specifically to my work with digital health, I think about how bias plays a role in the technology interventions and programs that we create. Who's on the teams that's a part of developing those algorithms, developing those platforms? What types of thought processes are being programmed unconsciously or consciously into these interventions that are supposed to be helping communities of color? So that is the voice, that is the perspective that I'm always bringing to the table in my work because of my personal and professional experiences with racism.
Thank you so much for your experience. I absolutely agree with everything you said, so thank you. Now we would like to hear from Dr. Thomas.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
You can hear me. Okay, very good. Well, again, you've got 65 people on this thread, and it's so exciting. This is my mother. May she rest in peace. If she was here, she'd be on the front lines of the COVID fight in the hospital. She was a nurse back in the day when nurses kind of looked like nurses. Everybody wore scrubs these days. But I have her on my shoulder so that we don't forget what it means to commit your life to serving others. So let me do it like this. And I think if you haven't read this article, it should be required reading for all of you. And it's The Levels of Racism by Kamara Jones. So let's take her structure, her theoretical framework, and see if I can apply it to your question. One of her first levels is called institutional racism. Now, let me tell you how old I am. You know how old I am? I'm so old. I remember growing up in Columbus, Ohio, and traveling to my grandmother's every summer to a rural area of Texas. Back in the 50s, when that happened, there was a certain kind of plan you had to have. To drive that far, there were hotels and places that you couldn't stay if you were Black. And so we had to time it how we got from point A to point B. And St. Louis was like the last water hole. Once you pass St. Louis, there'd be dragons. There'd be racism dragons. And so when we finally get to Texas, there were water fountains, and they had white water and colored water. Now, we're just kids. What water fountain do you think we wanted to drink out of coming out of Columbus, Ohio? Don't all speak at once. Of course, we wanted to find out what white water tastes like. And by doing that, we broke unspoken rules of Jim Crow. Unspoken rules that made our parents very anxious because they knew by breaking those rules, the whole family could be in trouble. Institutional racism operates without anybody having to say anything. Now those signs are gone. Do you think racism is gone? Absolutely not. It's now just built into the DNA of our institutions, and that's what COVID is exposing right now. Another example of growing up, I couldn't wait to go to school. There were 6 of us, because the principal would walk my older sister home every day. And I thought that was just, I can't wait to go to school. And it wasn't until we were literally adults and my sister told the real story. Why did the principal walk her home from school? Because the white kids threw rocks at her. So I'm so old. I have a family member that was the first person to integrate the elementary schools that we went to. I'm so old that I've been that first Black doctorate student, first Black assistant professor. Now, there's a generation of folks now who don't want to be first. Dr. Jackson would not go to an institution where she's the first, right, Dr. Jackson? So we have indeed made some progress. Personally mediated racism, intentional, unintentional acts of commission and omission. You just heard that from Dr. Jacoby Wilson. He described several examples of this personally mediated racism inflicted upon him by mentors and faculty and others. And then there's something called internalized racism. And I want to stay there just for a moment, because one of the things that we have to be very careful of as we name what's happening to us is to not let the internalized racism make us so bitter. Now, I'm going to tell the truth to these 65 people here. I'm so old. I remember when we would call somebody Black, and that was like a slur. I'm talking about people who look like me calling another person Black. And we would call each other these racial slur names growing up. And only later did I realize what that was about. It was a way of preparing us for what would happen when we entered the public schools, when somebody called you that word. It was a way of kind of desensitizing you in a way that you wouldn't react violently. It was a way of giving you some armor and a shield, some callus, we might say. And so those things are no longer necessary, but there's certain parenting skills where that still might be part of what we're doing as we're raising our children. Corporal punishment. I don't know about, I'm so old, I remember being spanked. That's how old I am. Now, all you young people are the timeout generation, am I right? Come on, Mrs. Aid, you were a timeout household, right? I'm teasing you. But the point is, all of these things impact how we raise our children, our parenting styles, and they're all caught up in this issue in the United States of race and racism. And now COVID, if there's one thing, it's simply an act of nature. COVID is an act of nature, and it's nature telling us something's wrong. Who would have imagined it would have shined this bright spotlight on how racism is actually still operational in our society? And now that we're talking about it, and then I'll just say this, I went to sleep realizing that if I were to go to a meeting and mention the word racism, somebody would say, who let the skunk in the room? Why do you have to bring that up? And then I wake up in the post-COVID world, in the COVID world, not post-COVID, in the COVID world, and I got folks wanting to be anti-racist institutions, like overnight. That's simply amazing. And what we have to do is we have to hold institutions and people accountable. Hold people and institutions accountable. Just because you put out an anti-racist statement, and major corporations are doing it, universities are doing it, departments are doing it, we have to see where the rubber hits the road. And I'm counting on you as that next generation to make some what? Good trouble. Some good trouble. You've been handed a baton, a torch, in a big race to help ensure that the American dream is available to all of us. So Congressman Lewis is part of that generation. His passing is also passing a torch to us. Okay? So the last thing I'll say is that because we're an educational institution, as the Irish poet W.B. Yeats said, education is not the filling of a pail. We're not just filling your head with information for you to regurgitate back. Education is the lighting of a torch for a purpose greater than yourself. I can think of no challenge for our country and our democracy more important than confronting the issue of racism in our society.
Thank you so much. We will try our best, and it was really great to hear your experiences. So now
I dropped something in the chat box, my story, when you guys get a chance, that describes my experience as a graduate student. And so you can take a look at that when you have a chance.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we would love to hear from Dr. Rebecca Fenton.
I want to echo Devlin saying thank you for having me, especially recognizing that in a pre-COVID world, I probably would not be speaking to a group of UMD students, seeing that I'm here in Chicago. So I greatly appreciate this opportunity. And I do think us working together as institutions and highlighting these issues are really what's going to allow the mass change that needs to happen, as opposed to having issues be siloed within our institutions and excusing them and assuming that's the way things always are. And then when you realize they're really being dealt with at every institution across the country, it's so much easier to be able to call them out with a stronger force. So I would say, as far as my story, starts really with a healthcare household. My mom's a nursing professor and my dad's a pediatrician, and both of them were the first in their families to go to college. And so I thankfully had a much better childhood than they did, and truly recognized the impact that not just going to college has on an individual, but also that next generation. And so also realized that as I was growing up, that where my experiences were as an African-American were very different than other people who looked like me. And I appreciate that my parents made sure that I had that perspective and didn't necessarily just kind of forget where they came from. And so I think my work in anti-racism really came from a place of equity, and initially educational equity, and realizing that the opportunities that I had are not afforded to everyone who looks like me, and what can I do even as a high school student tutoring to be able to change that. And so then I also knew that I wanted to do medicine, because for me, it felt like the biggest picture of being able to see issues and recognizing that especially kids will always go see their doctor as long as they have access to care, and often at least have better bridges to getting care than adults do. And yet needs such as housing or food or mental health are things that families don't recognize that they need, or don't necessarily even know who to go to. But when they come into the doctor, you ask the right questions, suddenly those issues are coming up, and then I can be a bridge to be able to provide them those other services in addition to providing for their medical care. And so then I would say that I also had experiences of people doubting my path at every institution that I got into because of me being Black. And so then again, those internalized racism messages of having to remind myself, no, I did work hard, and oh, I did have this score, as opposed to presuming that I was kind of the diversity pick. And then when I got into medical school, I realized the framework in which I pursued healthcare from this really broad perspective was very different than what my elite medical school was teaching me, and that it was actually more of this perspective of medicine is how you apply science. And that was just kind of the end of it. And so it was clear that my classmates loved science, the people teaching us love science, but just had no clue or really even interest in how those issues actually are applied into our very inequitable society, and specifically leaving behind Black and Indigenous people. And so it was actually really frustrating for me to know that I went into medicine to take care of Black people, and that my training was actually making me worse by blinding me to those issues and presuming that everybody's treated the same, to the point of like all of the pictures being of white people, all of the standards being of small people who don't fit inside BMI, which itself is its own racist thing. And that I had to actually constantly within my head check, in the same way that growing up, you tell yourself of like, oh, I don't want to do these things that my parents are doing. Internally, I had to be like, I don't want to do these things that my professors are teaching me. And yet that's what medical education teaches us to. And so I left with this perspective of realizing that there's not necessarily good doctors, bad doctors, in the same way that we spend so much time focusing on the one individual who happens to say something racist on TV, and we do all this work to get them off. And in reality, that racism is more commonly a structure, and that those phrases are really just representation of that structure. And so if we're cherry picking all of the individuals that are problematic, we're not doing anything to be able to dismantle that structure. And so as I left medical school and I realized, hey, actually I'm becoming a bad doctor by this institution, I can totally understand with people even without my background or why they are becoming bad doctors. And so instead of being focused on the individual actions of people, I want to try to work more on like, how do we teach differently? How do we view things differently? And so similar to Dr. Thomas, I'm excited that medical schools are now actually naming racism as a factor and not just saying, oh, Black people have these issues because of race, end of sentence. And then I would say with my own work, recognizing too within academia that it feels as if once people focus on a particular topic, Black communities are excluded from that, and that the fact that we say things like, oh, it's because of Tuskegee or other people's experiences that they just don't want to participate, and that we're okay with that. And so for me personally, my academic work has been grounded specifically in Black youth, because I know that that's the only way to protect and make sure that they're actually a part of it and centered in, and realizing that like, so every day when I talk about berries, it can be substance use, it can be trans experiences. It varies by the day, but ultimately I try to still look at all of these issues from the lens of Black youth. And so I appreciate being able to share these experiences with the panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fenton, for sharing your experiences and thoughts. We'd now like to hear from Dr. Vialta.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Jen. I'm so thrilled to be here. I graduated about a year ago from pediatric residency, as well as I got my master's in public health. And I feel like the weekends where I had my master's in public health classes were so exciting. And I don't know, I like keep getting like goosebumps, like hearing everyone talk. And I'm so thrilled that you guys put this together so that we can all kind of share our experiences. Young or old, it doesn't matter. I think all of us have a lot to bring to the table and a lot of experiences. So I'm so grateful to be here and to be on this panel. Everyone's just so amazing. My background, a little bit about my story. I'm a first-generation Latina. My parents immigrated from El Salvador during the Civil War. It was not a great place for them to live. And unfortunately, we had a few family members, including my grandfather, who were murdered. So that's why my parents, sought the American dream and came to the US. Fast forward, I grew up in South Central LA. So during the 92 riots, I vividly remember like I think I was like 7 years old, and just, watching like Rodney King on TV and just asking my dad, like, why is this okay? Like, this man is on the ground, So as a little kid, you already have this like innate love for humanity. And it's just kind of weird how as we, a lot of us get older, we kind of forget that. So that's something that I feel like really stuck with me. And then just, having these different experiences of racism, whether it be super small microaggressions, that we kind of have been conditioned to be okay with for some reason, to overt just racism from faculty in residency. And it's just, to me, it just felt like as I continued in my education and my academic endeavors that it would get better, but it's weird. I felt it get worse. So my first time I remember experiencing racism, I was in elementary school. My parents were helping me trying to get into a magnet program into GATE. And the principal didn't allow me to matriculate into GATE because I wasn't white, quote unquote, is what she said, and that my parents lied about my ethnicity on the paperwork, when really technically there's nowhere for them to write in Hispanic, you know, like they had to choose between all of these different constructs that we've been putting into boxes, you know, and they chose white because it was the only one they knew. And that's the reason why I wasn't matriculated into this school that would have helped me, you know? So that was my first experience with that. And it just continued from there. I went to junior college. I transferred to UCLA. I've always been very big on goal setting. I feel like that's one of the big reasons why I am where I am, being first generation, you know, having no help. My parents, even though, yes, they advocated for college, they had no idea how to fill out a FAFSA. They had no idea how much school was going to cost. So fast forward, I transferred to UCLA, and the first thing my counselor tells me is that let's make sure that you get through this first quarter. Let's make sure you can handle it before I spend all this time mapping out the next 2 years for you. And so I came back after my first quarter with straight A's and arguably one of the hardest majors, physiological sciences, at UCLA. And I was like, all right, we're ready. Like, let's plan my future. So it's just like things like that, you know, continuously, you know, people are not advocating for you. They're not rooting for you if they're not usually, unfortunately, a person of color. So not having mentors around has been a huge struggle. So whenever I find one, I'm always clinging on to them, you know, making sure that if they can help guide me, if they have a little bit of time, then that's who I'm going to stick with. And I hope that I'm doing the same thing for the youth following me, because I feel like it's really important. Like Dr. Fenton was saying, upstream, focusing on upstream things that we can do, especially with youth, is the way that we're going to change this, you know? Fast forward to residency instances where I felt racism, just blatantly, like the way that faculty respected me, you know, I would ask a question, they would never look at me in the eye, they would look at someone else who was Caucasian or who was Asian, even though they didn't ask the question, you know. And it was just kind of disheartening, and, you know, getting into arguments, like verbal arguments with my faculty, because, you know, you're just kind of expected to take it, and after a certain point you just can't take it anymore. And, you know, you try really hard to be professional and not be that girl that's going to pop off on someone, but, you know, disrespect is disrespect. It doesn't matter what color you are. So that was something that was really hard for me to deal with in residency, having faculty off the bat, you know, tell all the residents and all the other faculty, hey, this kid is bad, this kid is argumentative, this kid is not going to make it, they don't have good grades, laughing at them because they want to pursue pediatric residency. And it's like, you've already branded this child, this student, this pre-doctoral student, and everyone already thinks this, like, how do you think they're going to be successful in this environment? So that's kind of been a little bit of what I've experienced. And that's definitely formed like my focus on what I want to do. I definitely try and focus on people of color and helping them, just because I see the difference that I make when it's me, you know, providing care for kids of color as opposed to someone else, especially if it's someone who's Spanish speaking. You know, a lot of times they don't understand the medical information that happens, and parents don't even know that their kids are getting strapped down for an hour, having full mouth dental rehabilitations done, completely destroying this kid's, like, traumatizing these kids, you know, all in the name of they're a Medi-Cal patient, it's fine. Or even if it's unspoken, you know, it's thought that kids of color don't feel pain, so it's fine, and it's not fine. So that's what I seek to hopefully change. Hopefully I just started a teaching position at my old alma mater of UOP. So hopefully just kind of having someone who's of color be a faculty, you know, and showing them, hey, we treat everybody the same, regardless of their background, regardless of if they have a PPO, if they're for fee-for-service, if they're Medi-Cal, they get the same treatment, you know? So that's a little bit of my story. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vialta, for sharing your experiences and your thoughts. We would now like to hear from our final panelist, Dr. Bradley.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for just the invitation to be able to be a part of this conversation on racism in healthcare. As I have had the opportunity to listen to all of the different stories from the different panelists, I've been able to actually place a part of my experience and a part of me within each and every single one of those stories. I am probably third or fourth generation healthcare worker. My great-grandmother actually delivered humans and animals. Thank you very much. Yes, she was a midwife, and yeah, we're pretty proud of that. I think one of the things that when I saw this question was actually, it just actually took my mind all the way back to the very first experience that I had in working in healthcare as a teenager. My mother was a nurse, and being a career nurse, she always dressed me at Halloween as being a nurse. She wanted me to be just like her. As a matter of fact, she's still holding out a hope, and I'm here to tell you it ain't happening. So my particular calling and vocation actually ended up being more towards the administrative side of healthcare. And I actually was just going to utilize working at the same hospital that she worked at in order to get through my college education. First grandchild born, first grandchild to go to college and to complete it successfully. So I sit here with several degrees in several different, various subject matters. And healthcare was where I was actually able to stay and work and actually work through and work up. So one of the craziest things that happened, I started out in the healthcare field, actually being a what we called back then an admissions clerk, where I admitted people into the hospital. We were just transitioning over into the computer age, and yes, now you think you know about how old I am. And so as we started that transition, the interesting thing was that we were still trying to figure out, how to, get everything into the computer, and we still had to print it off, and we still had to run and deliver things by hand. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, yet trained by a very good mother, I had no idea that my own coworkers, many who were older than me, I was the first full-time Black person that they had ever had in that department. And there weren't a whole lot of full-time Black people within the hospital setting itself. And so back then you wore a uniform, and that uniform depicted where what department you worked in, and exactly pretty much how the hospital officials, thought of you as in regards to your status. So if you were a housekeeper, yeah, you had on a particular type of blue uniform. If you worked in the kitchen, you had on a particular type of uniform and an apron. Everybody had name badges, but I was the only person in my department, and at that time in my world, who wore street clothes, with a big fancy new badge. And still I faced racism based on the fact that other people that I worked with had no idea. They thought that, you're in the wrong place. This is what I kept getting told. What are you doing here? Why are you here? What are you doing in this patient's room? Who sent you? Who's your boss? And actually had security called on me several times until they remembered who I was and was like, no, she actually does work here. In regards to, other aspects, just even in my daily work, it seemed as though I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't getting things done as they wanted me to do. And actually, they worked very hard in order to make sure that I wasn't accomplishing my daily duties or my daily work goals. And all of that started to reinforce in me a sense of I wanted to be ready, and how am I going to be ready? And since I was already in college, I started to see more clearly of how my college education would be able to enhance my abilities and certainly be able to move me up and out of that department. You know, I wanted the job and I wanted to stay there, but I wanted up and out. And as a matter of fact, I started looking at the boss's job thinking, I can be her. You know, I could do this. You know, I just need the right education. And guess what? She didn't have any higher education. She didn't have any degree. She didn't have anything. She had been there for a long time and got a chance to rise up the ranks. So you have no idea how wonderful it was that when I did, and I went ahead and pursued my goal of higher education, how even though it was a struggle and even though it was a push, it did remind me constantly of really what I wanted. And I wanted to be able to be an example to others. And my mother instilled in me that, you know, if you can do it, since I was the older sibling, if you can do it, you'll inspire your brother to do it. You'll inspire your cousins to do it. And so that became a part of me. And so higher education then certainly became that wonderful vehicle for me to be able to use, to be able to help others, to be able to help themselves, and to make some positive changes at the conference tables that I sat at alone. You know, at the conference tables that I sat at where I had to fight, you know, for myself and for others who didn't even realize that I was fighting for them and fighting for their future in healthcare. You know, the fact that racism has been an issue in our healthcare field is not a new thing. You know, this has been going on for quite some time. And it is, I think the cover has been pulled off in regards to, you know, specifically this COVID-19 pandemic, even to the surprise of some of us who maybe didn't see it or maybe didn't, you know, it just wasn't in front of us, but it's in front of everybody now. And so we still have those great chances and great opportunities to be able to utilize the vehicle of education, to be able to help others, and certainly to be able to make positive changes and continue. We've all been at varying tables, you know, the panelists, you know, as I've listened to them and certainly been sitting here in awe, I'm thinking, wow, you know what, I want to get to know them, you know, a little bit more even after this call. Why? Because to me, it's very important to be able to group together and to be able to link arms together to make ourselves stronger, and certainly to be able to help all of you who are also listening and who are on this call. So there's been some horrible, what I would say some horrible things, and you'll probably consider some of the things that I've been through quite horrible, you know, being spit upon, being, you know, told that I didn't have the right to sit at a table. And all of these things went on in my age range when I was kind of like, I really didn't understand, and I wasn't trying to be dismissive, but I did want to be able to rise above. And certainly my education did allow me that opportunity to do that. And that's just one of my little stories. So I thank you again just for the chance of getting a chance to be a part of this, and looking forward to continuing to make good and positive strides and examples to others to be able to utilize, you know, education to be able to transport them to some wonderful places.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bradley. Thank you also to all the panelists for sharing some insight into the pervasive impacts of racism that you felt and that are everywhere in society and the world. I personally really identified with all the stories that you guys shared. And like Dr. Thomas said, anti-racism doesn't happen overnight, and making statements is really easy. But having the action and creating real lasting change is so much more difficult. So having this background that you guys shared with all of us on this call is really important, just kind of to frame the issue, to provide like the human experience as we move into the more action-oriented section of the webinar. So for this part, we have 4 questions that we'll pose one at a time to our group of panelists. We'll have you guys just kind of answer. You guys can popcorn off of each other. It's very open-ended. We won't call on people, so just share as you see fit. And to all of the attendees, feel free to have questions in the chat box. Feel free to interact. Do your due. So I'm going to pass it over to Alvina now for our first question.
All right, so for our first question, racism in healthcare is certainly not a new issue. What has the field of medicine and public health done in the past to try and rise above those biases? And in your opinion, why or why not have those attempts worked?
So let me get us started. As the previous speaker said, racism in medicine and healthcare would be easy to ignore were it not so well documented. We're seeing this reckoning going on in America, the taking down of the Confederate statues, the removal of the stars and bars. But guess what? We need to look in the mirror too, because back during the time of slavery, back during the time of this peculiar institution, as it was called, medicine provided the scientific rationale for slavery. I'll just give you one example. There are many. Have you ever heard of the book Bones in the Basement? The Medical College of South Carolina, I see Dr. Jacoby Wilson smiling there. They were doing renovations on a building, and they discovered human remains in a basement. So they brought in forensic scientists, anthropologists, and eventually the Smithsonian got involved. And the story they uncovered is a book, Bones in the Basement. And in that story, you hear the history of medicine. Because of the role religion played, it was not appropriate to do dissection of the human body. That was considered sacrilegious. But over time, medical schools who could do autopsies were seen as more prestigious. They actually used it as a marketing and recruitment tool. If you come here, you'll actually be able to dissect human bodies. Well, those bones were Black people. And they hired an African-American man who was respected in the community to find the graves where they dug up the bodies and brought those bodies to the medical college for dissection. Now, the mere fact that that could happen in a medical school where people take a Hippocratic oath lets you know how deep this goes in terms of the otherness status that Black people had. Fast forward to Governor Northrop, who is in his medical yearbook in blackface. Everyone wanted to get on Governor Northrop. I wanted to get on the institution. That's a yearbook. They even had little Black kids as mascots. We need to look in the mirror ourselves. The father of gynecology did his work on Black women without anesthesia. There was a statue to him in New York that was taken down. I was on the faculty at the University of Pittsburgh for 10 years in a building called the Thomas Perrin Hall. Thomas Perrin was the Surgeon General of the United States during the Tuskegee syphilis study. It was a movement by young people like you, young scholars like you, that said, I don't want my degree from an institution with that history on its name of its building. And they rallied and they protested, and the name of the building was changed. We need to look in the mirror ourselves. And then there are scientific algorithms in use today based on this notion that Black people were different. If Dr. Jen does a pulmonary function study, they have an African-American adjustment, a Black adjustment for lung volume. That all came from racist research back during the Civil War. We need to pull back the curtains, look in the mirror ourselves.
So I would like to also add to that. So the question was, why have some of these things not worked, right? And so some of the things that Dr. Thomas is talking about, I think what we have to remember is that a lot of this institutional structural racism, right? Communities of color, they didn't create racism. It was created by their white counterparts in the sense of when it comes to power and privilege, right? So I would say that one of the reasons why a lot of our progress hasn't been achieved as we've hoped is because our systems that have been created by those that have benefited from the power systems that they've demonstrated, or as Dr. Jacoby has noted, white supremacy, guys in the healthcare system, he just put it in the comments, you know, many of those systems, they're being led by a certain power and structural system. They're being led by a certain community, a certain population. And so until we can dismantle those structures, right, it's gonna be difficult and challenging for us to accomplish our anti-racism goals. And what I love about what I'm seeing on this call, at least what I saw before all the cameras went off, is this diverse group of this next generation where this is your opportunity, as well as the rest of us who are on here, to work to dismantle these systems. You know, as Dr. Fenton said earlier, we have to dismantle the systems. We can speak on an individual and one level, but until we start dismantling the systems, decentering whiteness and centering, you know, all of the other populations and groups that our country and our world is made of, we won't achieve the goals of anti-racism. In addition, it will be difficult for some of us who have been, lack of a better word, kind of brainwashed or told that some of these things are okay, right? Some of these, you know, supporting some of these racist behaviors are okay. And so we have to work together to dismantle the system and decentering all of these hundreds of years that have been celebrated, perpetuated. Until we do that, it's gonna be very difficult to achieve our goals. So some of you all are thinking, okay, that sounds right, but how do we do that? Well, I'm pushing you all as I'm pushing myself, and I'm sure my colleagues are pushing themselves to do, that in each of your spaces, wherever you choose to go, whether it's in dental care, in health service administration, in health education, in computer science, in business administration, wherever it is, you are pushing your spaces to change their systems. When you are at the table, you are asking the difficult questions. When you are at the table, you are saying, hey, are we being fair when it comes to this policy that we just put into place, or this policy that has been around for some odd decades? So that's where the change happens, in my opinion.
Can I piggyback off of Dr. Jackson? I thought that was, you hit it right, right, the point was perfect. I think one of the biggest things too is just those that have most of the diseases that we treat, you know, X, Y, and Z, whatever that sector may be, are concentrated in such a small population, but those that provide the care for those people do not reflect the populations that we serve. So I think it's so important that, you know, I know we've all been saying this for a few months now, like we have to diversify medicine, but it needs to be something that's a system. It needs to be like, I was just talking to the dean of UCLA, like you can't just say these things. You have to say next year when we matriculate our next class, it's going to be 25% minority, people of color, whatever. Like if you can't make those promises, nothing's going to change, because you're going to keep, I mean, I was part of the group that picked the next residents. It was a huge struggle, even with the director of my program, you know, she was blatantly racist during the conversations that we were having. You know, some of my co-residents would say, which one of the two do you want? Meaning, which one of the two Black girls or which one of the two Latina girls do you want to vote for to be a resident? It's like, wait, they're two individual people. I shouldn't have to choose between both of them. So I think, unfortunately, like we have to have structures that say like this percentage needs to be someone that represents the minorities that we're serving. I just wanted to add to that. Yeah, we just need more diversity in whoever has seats at the table. There needs to be more diversity so that we can make the right choices for our communities that need it the most.
Great. I really appreciate that for you guys. I know they have another burning question. Like I'm looking, all this stuff is lighting up over here. So we can go ahead because I definitely want to hear from everyone else with the next question.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. So our next question is, with the dark history of Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, Guatemala syphilis experiments, and more, Black, Indigenous, and people of color may have concerns regarding a COVID vaccine, treatments, and studies. How do you think these looming issues will impact BIPOC communities when a vaccine is created? And what extra outreach and trust building measures should be taken to ensure that BIPOC communities feel safe and have access to COVID therapies?
I'll jump in real quick. This is Jacoby again. So I think that's a really powerful question, really important question. I actually wrote a blog on this topic. It's on Medium for our lab, Siege Lab. And I think the title of the blog was, "We don't need warp speed, we need justice." Because Operation Warp Speed is the operation to get the vaccines done. I think we have vaccines now in stage 3, right, been tested. And I think the point is, with the backdrop of all those incidents, we've seen how BIPOC folks have been exploited, basically biological exploitation. Think about it, simultaneously, the commodification and the decommodification of BIPOC bodies at the same time. We need you for science, we don't value you. Think about that. We need you for science. We working on you for science to make some advancements. There's something magical and strange about you, but we dehumanize you. You're less than, right? And so in that blog, I talked about the need when it comes to vaccines. We have to have a focus. We have to have ethical principles of engagement. If you can get folks to overcome the mistrust, let me just slow down a little bit. The baggage, man. Think about all the baggage that communities of color, BIPOC folks have dealt with when it comes to criminalization of our bodies, when it comes to police brutality, right? When it comes to the educational system, when it comes to being dumped on with hazards. That's a lot of baggage. So why do you expect people to trust this vaccine when previous medical interventions have left people wanting, right? And so in that blog, I talked about, as you've already said, we got to make sure frontline and fence line folks are leading the efforts. We got to have people who look like the folks who are most impacted leading the science. In my blog, the Operation Warp Speed primary leadership, not a single person is a person of color. Not a single person is a person of color. That's an example, right? And I said, we got to make sure minority service institutions are the ones leading the work, whether it be the Hispanic service institutions, Pacific Island service institutions, Indigenous service institutions, particularly serving the reservation populations, Black institutions like historically Black colleges. I believe Morehouse received the $40 million COVID-19 Coordinator Center funding. That's great. That's $40 million. Every HBCU should be getting $40 million to do frontline, fence line engagement as it relates to development of therapeutics, as it relates to the development of diagnostics, as it relates to the development of vaccines. And I also said in that blog, you got to make sure that this everybody gets access to the safe vaccine, and you got to deal with this, as you all already said. I'm going to be quiet after a couple more seconds. You have to not just get the vaccine out. You got to address the things that undergird the healthcare disparities. You got folks living in healthcare deserts, recreational deserts, food deserts. I mean, we're talking about healthcare apartheid. Let me say it that way. We're talking about food apartheid. We're talking about environmental slavery. You got to make sure there's investments in communities to make sure that we make them truly healthy and not just focus on healthcare, which is, in my opinion, sick care, but really building healthy communities. So the vaccine is only one part of addressing disparities. We have to invest in sustainable, healthy, equitable communities. That means resources. That means also investing in community-based organizations, grassroots groups. So there are if you think about promoters, lay health workers, they're the ones that lead the work. They're the ones that drive the work. They're the faces that people see. I'll be quiet. I got other stuff in the blog, but I'll try to put the blog in the post. Thanks.
And you know, holding
Kayla.
Holding our institutions accountable. I mean, it's just been maybe 3 months ago, the NIH came out with a major report of why do African Americans not receive R01 grants? For the young scholars out there, the R01 is considered the gold standard of research of independence. And they ran this big analysis, and they found that young scholars of color have titles like preventing type 2 diabetes among African Americans, or addressing prostate cancer in Black men in inner cities. Those titles, thumbs down. But if you had a title like kidney filtration in the left kidney on Wednesdays, or something very, very reductionist. I see Dr. Jen laughing over there. You know what I'm talking about. Oh, you got funded then. This bias, now they're just reporting the results, like, oh, this is just the results of our analysis. But I heard faculty mentoring young scholars of color saying to themselves, Soraya, you don't want to do community engaged research because you'll never be funded. You'll never be promoted. I could hear them saying that rather than using their power, their position, to push back against an institutional bias against action research, an institutional bias against translating what we know into actual interventions that save lives. We've got to stand up, and COVID has given us the opportunity to do that. And it's not just COVID, and I'm sorry if I missed this, it's also the death of George Floyd that could not be denied. In South Africa, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Guess what we have? Cell phones. This is our Truth and Reconciliation Commission. No one could deny what happened to that man. And it happened in Minneapolis, not Mississippi. If it was Mississippi, we wouldn't have demonstrations in Germany and Australia and all over the world. Minneapolis, they don't see themselves that way. And the Robert Wood Johnson rankings, Minneapolis, St. Paul area, #1 in happiness, #1 in wealth, #1 in all the things you want in the community. And it was the governor who came out and said, that is true if you're white. And they're starting to reckon with, we cannot move forward with this built-in inequality. So this is our moment. This is our march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. This is our, all those seminal points where the country had to make a distinction. Are we going to be true to our values? When we made those decisions, we've made the right choice. We're there right now, and you guys are part of it. So you're not going to be reading about history. You're going to be making history. That's what makes this so exciting.
Just to piggyback off that, I think it's really important to think about like the means that we give all this communication to the communities that, we're trying to help the most. I think a lot of times we think that everyone's watching the news, everyone's reading the newspaper, and that's not how everyone gets their information. So just kind of thinking about how do we get into the community? How do we get them to trust us? One thing, like we were saying, increase diversity. So that way the people going into the communities look like the community themselves. Disseminating the information in a way that they're going to understand it, whether it be in different languages, whether it be through games, storytelling, every different community kind of learns differently. Every different age group learns differently. So just kind of making sure that we think about that. There's a lot of grandmothers who are the primary caregivers of a lot of kids. So kind of understanding like, how do I get this information to grandma so that grandma can get that information to the rest of the family? So just kind of focusing on, okay, if we do have all this information, how are we going to give it to our communities so that they can feel empowered to, be sustainable in the changes that they're going to make their communities healthier.
The other thing that I want to add to that is also, in addition to diversity and inclusion, right? Because diversity, we've all heard the analogy of being invited to the party. So diversity is about you are at the party, you are seen, but inclusion means that you were asked to dance, you were asked to select the music, determine what types of foods we're going to all eat collectively. And so that's a huge part when we think about ways to dismantle anti-racism and build trust in our communities is true inclusion with each and every one of our communities, with all of our communities of color. And then not forgetting that when we are including those communities of color and really creating true representation of what our world looks like, we are also thinking about those intersections that each of these communities experience. And what do I mean by the intersections? Thinking about the income inequalities that they face, or things that they're experiencing as it relates to their other identities that maybe have not been addressed in healthcare. And when you start to layer all of those, what are some of the barriers that they're facing that we need to dismantle also? So those are the things that I think we want to think about when we're thinking about building trust, when we're thinking about, bringing everyone together and dismantling anti-racism.
Perfect. I really appreciate that. Great conversation. So I know we're going to definitely kind of feed into another question, so we can leave some Q&A time because I see quite a few questions for you guys. So we can definitely hop into the next question. Whoever wants to ask the next question.
Yeah, I can ask the next question. So our next question to our panelists is, what should current undergraduates who hope to go into the healthcare field take into consideration before pursuing this field in order to maximize the health and safety for their future patients, and not just within the healthcare field, but also kind of on the health administrative side, and kind of incorporating that entire field?
I can go first. So I guess if this is kind of a combo answer from the first question as well, which I think is making sure that you understand the history of medicine in general, healthcare in general, but especially your own field. I think there's been a move that has been trying to address the issues that we're talking about as far as inequities. That's implicit bias training. And the reason why implicit bias training fails is because it's not addressing structural racism. It's essentially telling people like, hey, you may make a bad decision, something that you're not aware of, but it's kind of random. Just like stop and think about it, rather than acknowledging that those biases actually aren't random. And we have plenty of research to show us what inequities exist within populations. And the reality is your bias is just going to continue to perpetuate the issues that have already been there. And so I think of, for myself in adolescent medicine, one of my roles is prescribing birth control or contraception for adolescents. It's a shame that it took me working and reading on my own to read the work of Dorothy Roberts and realizing that there was a terrible history of Norplant, which was targeted not just towards Black communities, but specifically Black girls, even without the consent and awareness of their parents. And unfortunately, only time and their experiences revealed that that form of contraception was very unsafe. And so now when I hear families come in and ask me questions of and understandable fear around, is birth control safe? What are the side effects? What's going to happen to my daughter later on? Even when I think it's medically indicated, I have the knowledge now to really sit with their fears and being able to understand what historical trauma they're bringing into the room with me. And the reality is that should be implemented into curriculum, but I would say both for my medical education, now my specialty education, that's not something that's routinely taught. And in fact, I'm the one who's teaching my attendings who are supervising me and informing them of this history. And so I think taking the onus of realizing if you're doing this work, you need to do it well, and that education may not necessarily give you that knowledge to be able to do so.
You know, what's interesting is that you go into this to serve. How can you not go into this to serve? And then you get into it and you're socialized in the business of medicine, in the rankism of medicine. Oh, a neurosurgeon is better than a pediatrician. And you go through the whole thing. Oh, you did your residency in pediatrics. Oh, that's less than the residency in surgery. You see what I'm saying? And all of a sudden, you get your humanity taken out of you. You get the reason you went into medicine taken out of you with the careerism that's in the field. And even in COVID, I love the clapping for the healthcare workers, the military flyover for the healthcare workers. But guess what? They didn't include the people working in the nursing homes. They didn't include the people working in extended care, because they're healthcare workers, but they're perceived as less than. So you've got to fight against that as you enter into these institutions. And maybe you'll select a medical school or wherever you get your degree based on a commitment to these kind of core values. That's how we're going to change things. That you don't change who you are simply to advance your career. To advance your career on the suffering of others is not appropriate. If you come to the University of Maryland School of Public Health, those are the values we want to instill in you. And Dr. Fenton and Dr. Bradley, Zoom has brought us together, but this ain't the last time we're going to be hanging out.
I appreciate that. Definitely. I just want to add that sometimes it, think about all of this great education that you all are about to be and are being exposed to. You're getting down to the nitty gritty about learning policies and learning all of the different types of nuances of the rules and the regulations and the varying things that you're going to need in order to function in the careers that you are aspiring to. But I also want to tap into your pure minds about simply making sure that you're treating people in the way that you want to be treated. When you stop to think about, and you're whether it's a conference table that you're sitting at, whether it's a larger group, whether, even whether it's, you're just dealing with something on a departmental basis. One of the things that kept me focused was, is this how I would want my family member to be treated? Is this how I would want myself to be treated? And what's going on as far as futuristically, as you're sitting there, devising up a new plan, being able to work, through whatever project parameters, is this going to be good for the communities, plural, in which I serve, in which the facility that I work at serves? Is this going to be something that, is, quite honestly, if it's waking you up at night, yeah, you need to be thinking about, hey, look, is this the best thing? There are going to be some times when you might have to make some compromising aspects only to be able to say that I'm going to bend here, but I'm not going to bend someplace else, because the overall is still going to get accomplished. We have been struggling, in this country for a long time, because when we go through all of this great education and we acquire all of this great education, and we get a chance then to actually sit down at the table, don't forget what got you there. Do not forget what got you there. Go back and think about the conversations that are happening and that are surrounding you as individuals right now. And think about where you may not be able to change the entire facility, the one step that you make may be that domino that then changes all of the community in which you serve and all of the healthcare aspects of it. Sometimes it's just that little thing. And because you all are linked together, and I believe that there's a determination to stay linked together, then as you're linking together with other professionals as well, you know, I had an old pastor that told me once that iron sharpens iron. And so we continue then to be sharpened by one another and then thereby be able to grow and to be able to win more fights and win more battles and tackle more together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're not going to paint a picture to you that it's going to be easy, but I believe that the picture that we can paint to you is that because we were determined and because we are still determined, that we've lived long enough, I'm not going to put no age on no panelists but me, but we've lived long enough to be able to see not just minor changes, but changes that have lasted throughout the time frame of the communities in which we serve. So that's my advice to you, is to be thinking about how is it that you personally would want to be treated through this, and then help to make those great policies and those great decisions, even based on that. We got, it's a good start.
Yes.
That's just my advice.
I love that Dr. Bradley said that, because I wanted to add also that, you know, sometimes when her point about treating others as you want to be treated, I think sometimes when we talk about, you know, topics like anti-racism, I think sometimes people narrow it down to, well, I'm only focused on the Black community, or I'm only going to focus on the Hispanic community, or I'm only going to focus on the Native Americans, or I'm only going to focus on the, and my whole thing, if you're really about anti-racism, in my opinion, you care about everybody. So if that person who doesn't look like you, if they're not eating, you should consider yourself not eating too. So if you take on that attitude, that's what I'm talking about, us working together in this inclusion, collaborative. That's how we can really achieve equity, you know? So I love that Dr. Bradley set it up in that way. Because if one of us isn't eating, then all of us aren't eating. And that's the way that we need to be thinking about this when we are trying to come up with solutions. So what I mean by that also is, don't be quiet when you see someone who doesn't look like you not being treated fairly, or a policy that is about to hurt them or impact them. Speak up. And I wrote to, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, Michaela, or their name correctly, is that I talked about, you know, there's power in numbers. Get with your mentors, your peers, others who have similar interests, and you all fight together. And as Dr. Bradley said, you're going to be tired. There are going to be days where you're going to feel like, what is the point? But do not give up, because you're just setting up and opening the door a little bit wider for the next person, the next generation to come in and make that door even wider for the next and the next and the next.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, is it over already?
No, we could probably go for it because we're getting to the Q&A.
Okay, I just want to say real quickly, I was going to say something. I thought, let me just say this real quick. Sorry, I forgot for a second. I think this is really inspiring for me. I just want to say, you know, as was just said, you know, part of my job is to do great science. My most important job now is to train the now and next generation. So I love what I'm hearing. And I think the mentoring comment was brought up before. You got to find mentors, folks. And, you know, my best mentors to this day are still Dr. Rather Brown, Dr. Marjorie Campbell, Dr. Evelyn Ellis, and Dean Schufer at Alabama A&M University, my HBCU mentors to this day, hands down, not even close. They are the ones who built me up, gave me, you know, some confidence, made sure I was in the right direction. So you need those mentors to provide the support for you. And just to close, to get to the questions, and I just want to say real quickly, I'm tired. I feel like Atlas was this EJ stuff on my back. It's time. I want to pass the baton. So I want to make sure I train folks so they can be soldiers. You hear the comments about being a Jedi warrior. We got to make sure that justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is ingrained in everything that you do. That has to be part of your why. That's got to be part of who you are. And that's why I am where I am today. Regardless of the alopecia, regardless of the racism, the rankism, the imposterism, being otherwise marginalized, nobody can stop me. And no one's going to stop me from doing what I need to do for my community. You got to have the same attitude, but you can't do it by yourself. So you need peers and you need mentors.
Very true. Very
And
true.
we need to pay it forward. Because the mentors that we've had, we would be nowhere without them. So you have to be that person for someone else. So make it a point every week to make sure you're helping somebody.
All right, everyone. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go right ahead.
All right, so that was our last structured question for the webinar. I just want to thank our panelists for sharing their thoughts and experiences, and also thank you to our audience for listening and engaging. We would like to now start our Q&A session and allow anyone to ask any questions you might have. So feel free to just raise your hand or type directly your question into the box. And I'm actually going to start it off with a question that Haley asked a while ago that we didn't get a chance to address. Her question was, how should minority students deal with the backlash that comes with diversifying institutions of higher education?
I'll try to be brief. When I was at UNC Chapel Hill, I was co-president of the Minority Student Caucus for 4 years. And so I think, as I said earlier, I think joining student organizations, if you have one, join it. If you don't have one, where you have like-minded folks to help support you, start one. So I'll just stop there.
I think just know it's not going to be easy, and that you will probably have to be that person who continues to speak up, and you're going to have to be ready for people rolling their eyes at you, but you know what? It's what you have to do. So just be ready for pushback, but don't focus on that. Focus on the great movements that you're going to make, and focus on the great relationships that you're going to make with like-minded people who are going to help you get to that next step.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that is back to the mentors. As a person of color in academia, and in a lot of, I mean, heck, in most industries, right? When we see it in the news, you need mentors. Because they're gonna help you manage those frustrations, manage when you wanna give up, manage when you wanna just shy back in the background. And so find mentors. If someone says, well, I don't have time, ask them, well, can you connect me with someone who does? Keep looking, find those mentors who get it, wanna nurture, wanna be there. And remember, one mentor can't be all things for you. So some mentors might just be about the experience of being a person of color in this space. Another mentor might be about how to navigate those spaces, how to go after certain awards, how to apply for certain jobs. But mentor is key. Especially when you are representing a marginalized group or a vulnerable pop or you represent a person of color.
I was going to add as well that the reason why there's the concern for backlash is because of just thinking of that power differential, that clearly you've got your leadership, which is most likely white, in charge versus the mass of students. And so how do you overcome that power differential? I would say first is you work in a group of students, so not necessarily being highlighted as the one person, just because when you do that, you are putting yourself at risk of being dismissed as the problematic student, because it's so much easier to silence the problematic student than it is to reckon with the fact that the institution is racist. So if you are representing a group of students, then together highlighting the school's issues allows your voice to be powerful. Second, if possible, looking for allies within your institution. So maybe it's not the leadership, but it's a professor or attending who's talking about these issues, to be able to add to that so that they're bringing their power of their role to your voices. And then I think the third thing is realizing that even if your institution doesn't care about anti-racism, they do care about how they look to the public. And so recognizing that they're dependent on alumni money coming back to them. And so ultimately, if you've taken all the steps of addressing stuff involving the media or reaching out to alumni so that other people know, because we all know when one institution's has a bad story, how fast that spreads, how much students don't want to come there for the following year. So you do actually have power. It's just, I think, the key of recognizing how to use that because of your role as a student.
Yes, yes. The power is yours. I thank Dr. Fenton for what she said, because not too long ago, I made a comment even at my university among some peers of mine that, if students only knew the power they had, oh my goodness. So, the power is yours. And I would say that along with what the other panelists have already said, Dr. Wilson had already put in the chat at one point in time about your why. And trust me, you're gonna have some midnights. Oh my goodness. Gonna have some struggles, you're gonna have some fights. And I would say to you all that that might seem a very small thing right now, but if you remember your why is it that you got into this in the first place? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? What is it that you want to do? Remembering your why and having that in front of you. If you have to write it down and tape it to the laptop or am I dating myself here? Laptop, iPad, excuse me, sorry. If you have to write it down and tape it to something, the dashboard of the car, I know I'm good on that. Y'all got cars, right? So whatever you have to write it down and tape it onto, if you have to put it on your cell phone as a, yeah, y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Just make a picture out of it. This is why I'm in it. And maybe all it has to be is today I'm remembering my why. This week I'm remembering my why. Tomorrow I'm remembering my why. And you will, certainly along with all of the great, wonderful things that the other panelists said, certainly those are going to be some great things that are certainly going to be able to carry you through. One last thing is that oftentimes I am reminding my undergrad population of students who I am around quite a bit. Even though I teach at a graduate level, I'm around a lot of undergrad students. And oftentimes I'm reminding them, don't forget home. There is a lot of strength in some of our home structures, whether it's traditional home structures or non-traditional, whatever that looks like to you, because guess what? They're rooting for you and they are in your corner. And I was very, very surprised to realize of the individuals who, in that story that I told in the beginning of my experience in my healthcare setting, my first healthcare job, I didn't tell you about my Underground Railroad of individuals who were working in other departments who I didn't even know, but they saw me struggling and they picked me up and they helped me to learn the pathways of that hospital. And I became the best admissions clerk that they ever had. Okay, why? Because other people, also invested in me, and they just saw something that they had not had the opportunity to be, and they were rooting for me, the little college girl. Okay, and that's what they called me. And did I care? No, I didn't. The little college girl. It was like, come on, we're gonna help her. We're gonna make sure she knows the floor plan of the hospital. We're gonna make sure she gets around. So there's a lot of times when you make those visits or you go home, there's a lot of more people that are rooting for you. Okay, so don't forget to tap in, to that. But that's my main thing. Remember your why.
Thank you. Okay, so I think they may have one final question, if I'm not mistaken, from two of the students. I think they're going to merge that question together. So, and then we're not going to take up too much of your time. But again, I want to thank everybody again for staying on board. It's a lot of great conversation. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to turn it over for that final question.
Okay, so one of the final questions is that has there been any notable improvements that you have seen since you first started working in the healthcare field, or does it seem as though things are only changing on the surface?
So I guess I will just talk about some things that I'm noticing since some of these anti-racism statements have come out. In some of the spaces that I am a part of, I am seeing leadership really take a look at policies. And of course, this is not going to happen overnight. But what I am noticing, which I think that is the first step, is people are being invited to have conversations about first, what are the concerns? Where do we see are the issues, the challenges? And then after we talk about what are the issues and concerns, then we need to start looking at what policies, at what levels, which really is probably at all the levels. And then we can start coming up with some actions and solutions. So I'm not sure if that necessarily answered your question, but that's the change that I think I'm seeing and is promising or is giving me hope, because I mean, I don't know if we've really been this frank and transparent about race ever, you know? So, I mean, all the conversations that we're having, discussions about next steps, that is to me some change, and hopefully it'll be a continued way in which we operate. But that's the change that I'm seeing so far, that I don't think it's surface. I think there's some genuine hope that this will be the way in which we operate from this point moving forward.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, for speaking, and for everyone speaking. We did go a little bit over time, which is totally fine, but I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out and participating in our webinar. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. I just wanted to thank the panelists for taking time out of their day today to come speak to us about, you know, such an important issue. And me, as, you know, being an undergraduate student, it's really important to kind of learn from our elders, in a sense. Not that you guys are old, but it's been really great hearing what you guys have to say for our, you know, continuing on this fight. I also want to thank Dr. Seal, our faculty sponsor, for helping us organize this event, and to all of the participants that joined in on the conversation today. So I believe this is going to be our natural end. So the only thing is that if you guys do want to stay back and hear more about what UAEM is or ask questions regarding that, feel free to stay back. But other than that, I feel like we've reached a good ending point, and it was really nice to hear from everybody. Yeah.
You guys make me so proud. I'm so proud of you guys.
Thank you guys so much, or thank everyone so much. Apologies. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks everybody. I gotta get into the garden. I gotta go pick some okra to cook and some collard greens. So see y'all later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for the invitation. If anyone wants to reach out, please do. I'm always available. Anything you guys need help with, I'm here.
Perfect.
Yo, thank you. Great
Perfect.
panel.
Absolutely. Thank you all very
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you.
Nice meeting everyone.
You too.
Bye.
Take care.
And that's okay. You can call me old. It's really no problem. I'll be old again in a couple more weeks. So.